President Cyril Ramaphosa revealing that he actually considered resigning as deputy president of the country when Des Van Rooyen was actually appointed finance minister. He's also denied having prior knowledge of former Eskom CEO Brian Molefe's links to the Guptas, explaining that his recommendation for his appointment was a mere coincidence. The president then objected to Molefe's accusations that he actually furthered his own business interests while he was still the chair of the so-called Eskom war room. What should we make of these? Let's bring in our guest. Valencia Talane is a senior investigative journalist with Corruption Watch, joining us now to unpack some of the big take-homes, if you like, from day one of the president's testimony at the State Capture Commission of Inquiry. Valencia, it's great to see you. Thanks very much indeed for making time to chat to us here on the AM Report. I wonder whether we can start with that Des Van Rooyen moment, as I would call it, where the president was essentially explaining that, as far as he's concerned, putting Des Van Rooyen as the finance minister was a step too far and was a consolidation, in some respects, of the capture of Treasury. As a springboard to our discussion, I just want to take our viewers back to that moment. Take a look at this.
I immediately contacted the then and now ANC Deputy Secretary General, J.C. Duarte, and indicated in a meeting with her that this is what had happened, and I was now really concerned that state capture had reached this level. Now I said to her that I would resign my position, Deputy President of the Republic, and I believe that that message was conveyed to the then President. And maybe that would have raised a concern, I don't know. Then there was a flurry of consultations that involved some of the ANC officials expressing disquiet about the appointment of Mr. Des Van Rooyen. The then ANC Secretary General Gwede Mantashe, Ms. Duarte and myself urged the President to appoint another person as the finance minister because the reaction in the financial markets was turning to be quite horrific. And it is then that we urged that he should appoint Mr. Pravin Gordhan.
So the president there, Valencia, essentially explaining that he almost walked away at that point. The reality, though, is that he didn't. So did he go far enough in exonerating himself from any culpability of what happened during that time?
Thank you so much, and good morning to you and your viewers, of course. You know, the most, I suppose, surprising thing for me is that the president of the country came onto the screen before the commission yesterday and did a sort of about turn on the rave review he had done on the cadre deployment committee issue the last time he was there, in the sense that this time round he speaks of the moves that he made from within the party and from within government, whereas back then he to make sure that there were changes to what he deemed to be state capture deployees and state capture moves within the state. Back then he made it sound like the cadre deployment concept was a great one, in the sense that it was absolutely needed by the country. It was there to put the most people who are fit for purpose, he said at the time. So now, so he's ranged between having enough influence for what is an agenda of the ANC, a structured agenda of the ANC, to going on a whim and going, remove this person or else I will go and leave my position. So it's a bit, it's almost as if we're looking at two different roles that he played. It has been quite a bit confusing and surprising for me, but it's a very revealing statement that he made about what happened in December of 2015.
Right. I mean, given the work that you've done with Corruption Watch, what do you make of, the posturing of things like cadre deployment, specifically from the ANC now? Pulia Mabe, on this program just last night, essentially trying to convince our viewers that all the cadre deployment committee does is give recommendations, and government is almost in an unrelated way at liberty to either take those recommendations on or in fact dismiss them. With the work you've done, is that an accurate representation of how things actually work?
Unfortunately not, and I'll tell you why. On paper, it sounds like, like I said, Mr. Ramaphosa sold it as a concept that helps forward the agenda of the ANC, the developmental agenda of the ANC back in April when he was appearing before the commission for the first time. In reality, though, if he can come back and say there were appointments outside of this great concept that was envisioned as a filter, he called it, a filter so that only the best can get through and be recommended to state institutions, to head up state institutions and stuff like that. Unfortunately, because it has not worked for the ANC, it comes back as egg on the faces of the ANC and a detriment to members of the public, because we end up with leaders of institutions who are not fit for purpose as they could have been, and also who cost the state a lot of resources in terms of, in some cases, serious corruption cases, serious corruption allegations, and serious corruption cases, of course. So it works on paper, but not necessarily in reality, no. And I think after yesterday's testimony, it would be good and well for the ANC to reconsider whether or not we carry on with such a concept within the party.
There's a great appetite for getting some kind of accountability from not only the president himself, but from the ANC in its entirety. How important is it for the organization to, at the very least, concede that the lines were seriously blurred between state and party through this cadre deployment committee?
It's very important. Unfortunately, it has not been done, not even with the leader of the party sitting before the commission. I think the president has been quite vague in terms of how the failures happened and what has been on the part of the leadership of the ANC, what has been happening in terms of fixing the issues that have been coming up over the past several decades. He is very, very interestingly, his position before the commission is that he wants for us to look forward to an ANC that is able to fix itself without explaining to us how and what fixing itself means when we have such serious corruption issues in the country that the party itself has not really accounted for, and that the party itself has not seemed to take head on.
Absolutely. In fact, he said several times that there were systems failures within governance, and in some respects that was meant to be enough, one would presume. But let's shift focus to another moment, certainly capturing a lot of headlines the morning after, and that's to do with what the president said he knew and didn't know about Brian Molefe. Many people being taken aback that it was actually Cyril Ramaphosa who recommended that Brian Molefe be appointed. How important is that detail, do you think, when we start connecting the dots around how state capture actually took place?
Again, I'll take you back to my first point that on the one hand, he has this great things, he has wonderful things to say about the deployment committee and how it works in an ideal world. And then he goes and says that it was him who recommended Mr. Molefe to be seconded to Eskom, which inadvertently says to us that he went outside of the very deployment committee that is supposed to be, handling such issues for the ANC and for ultimately the state. So from what he thought at the time, or what he said he thought at the time, it was a good call because he knows Molefe's credentials. He knows that he would be great at helping to turn around a huge institution such as Eskom. But in that very moment, he also it tells us that he sidestepped the very processes that he's been championing as chair of the deployment committee.
Right. Staying with Molefe as well, do you buy the claim that the president made that he actually didn't even know that Brian Molefe had ties to the Guptas until it was revealed in the media?
It's hard to understand how that is possible because, and I think the way that he tried to absolve himself from that responsibility was when he said that there were many entry points into Eskom from the state. So one hand didn't know what the other hand was doing a lot of the times. But if he thought that Brian Molefe was the best candidate for handling Eskom issues at the time that he said were quite dire and investors were already complaining and stuff like that, then he could have done a lot more digging. For the president to say that he knew of his credentials from way back when he was, I forget now the name of the organization that he spoke of, but without checking into, say, the last 5 years of Brian Molefe's tenure at Transnet just before he started at Eskom, it makes you wonder, is he only now remembering, that it's important to place certain scenarios into the minds of South Africans in the sense that it was actually myself who placed my accuser before my accuser's name before the then President Jacob Zuma and said, hire this man for Eskom so that he can turn it around. It's quite baffling, really.
Yeah. It was Deputy Chief Justice Rubenzondo yesterday who I think at the tail end of that testimony said to the President that PRASA represents an illustration of how an SOE can successfully be captured. To what extent do you reckon that is a posturing of what this inquiry might actually find at the end of its work?
Look, this is not the first time he has said this. He's quite, I think, for if what has been said by the DCJ is anything to go back from what he has said in the past about PRASA particularly. I think he's probably coming from the point of view that, putting trains on rail tracks it should not be such a, cumbersome, extraordinarily, complex process. One that has to cost the country so much money in terms of who ends up doing that work. So I would say that it does sound like it is probably their poster child for what has gone wrong with the country, in the sense that the accountability that the former chairperson of its board, Nkateko Molefe, claims to have tried to seek in terms of from knocking on the doors of the ANC, knocking on the doors of the president at the time, other people, before going the legal route. So from an accountability point of view, even though a lot seems to have been lost through PRASA in alleged corruption, it was the aftermath of that, the fact that it seems to be attempts on the part of the board or of Popo Molefe to fix that and to hold those who are responsible accountable. But again, yesterday it came up as that didn't seem to go well, and therefore I would imagine that the DCJ is probably considering how what measures should be taken in terms of seeking accountability and actually holding people accountable once such corruption has been found to have happened in a parastatal.
Valencia Talane, thanks very much indeed for your take as well as your reflections on day one of President Cyril Ramaphosa's testimony. Something tells me a whole lot more will need to be ventilated still in the coming days and weeks ahead. Thanks very much indeed for your time for now. Valencia Talane is a senior investigative journalist with Corruption Watch.